The day Ebony's husband locked the shop door against her, rain was falling hard. It was not the gentle rain that cools the earth and makes children dance outside. It was the angry kind that floods the streets and ruins everyone's plans for the day. Ebony stood outside the wooden shop door, her wrapper already soaked through with water. Her basket of smoked fish was heavy on her arm. She had bought the fish early that morning from the market, just like she did every Tuesday and Friday. She tried the door once. It was locked. She knocked softly, thinking perhaps Kola had locked it by mistake. "Kola?" she called through the door. "It's me. Please open the door." From inside the shop she heard laughter. It was a woman's laughter, light and careless. The sound made Ebony's stomach tighten with worry. The door opened just enough for Kola's face to appear in the gap. He did not smile at her. His eyes were cold, like he was looking at a stranger instead of his wife. "You shouldn't be here," he said flatly. Ebony blinked in confusion. "This is our shop. I brought the fish for today's customers." Kola stepped outside and closed the door firmly behind him. He stood between Ebony and the shop entrance. "This shop is in my name," he said calmly, as if he was discussing the weather. "Go home, Ebony." The words hit her harder than the rain hitting her face. People walking past stopped and stared at them. Some whispered to each other. Ebony felt heat rise to her face, even though the rain was cold. She wanted to shout at Kola, to ask him what had happened to change everything. But she did not cry. She simply nodded slowly and turned away from the shop. As she walked home through the flooded streets, water splashing around her ankles, Ebony remembered many things. She remembered the title deed she had signed years ago without reading it carefully. She remembered how Kola always said, "Leave business matters to me. You don't understand these complicated things." She remembered trusting him completely because he was her husband. That night, as thunder shook the walls of their small house, Ebony sat alone in the dark. Kola did not come home. She whispered to herself, "If paper took this from me, paper will give it back." She did not know exactly how she would do this. She only knew that she would not accept defeat. Her mother had always said that the quietest water runs the deepest. Ebony decided she would be like that water. And that was how her quiet war began. Not with shouting or crying, but with a whispered promise to herself in the darkness. Ebony did not grow up dreaming of riches or fine clothes. She grew up learning how to survive in a world that was often hard and unfair. Her mother sold firewood in the market, carrying heavy bundles on her head every day. Her father repaired old radios that rarely worked properly again, but people brought them anyway because he charged very little. When food was short in their house, which happened often, Ebony learned to chew slowly so that hunger would wait a little longer before returning. At 12 years old, she could count money faster than most adults. At 14, she knew which market days brought profit and which brought loss. She watched traders argue with customers, settle disputes, and sometimes cheat people who were not paying attention. She learned that business was not just about buying and selling. It was about watching and learning. "Eyes are sharper than ears," her mother used to say while cooking their evening meal. "Watch carefully before you speak." When her parents died during the bad fever season, when many people in the village fell sick, Ebony did not scream or fall apart. She was 16 years old. She packed their few belongings and moved to her aunt's house in the town. There she learned another important lesson about life. Gratitude can turn into chains, her aunt told her kindly one evening. Never forget who feeds you, but also never stop working to feed yourself. Ebony worked harder than anyone else in her aunt's house. She swept the compound before dawn. She cooked meals for the whole family. She sold vegetables in the market after school, standing in the hot sun for hours. When boys her age laughed at her torn sandals and faded dress, she ignored them completely. She was too busy counting her steps forward, not counting insults. Her aunt's husband sometimes complained about feeding an extra mouth. Ebony heard him through the thin walls at night. So she made herself useful in every way possible. She fetched water without being asked. She helped her younger cousins with their homework. She never ate more than her small share of food. By the time she was 20 and married Kola, she believed that hard work would protect her from poverty and suffering. She believed that love and effort were enough to build a good life. She believed that if she was a good wife, she would be treated fairly. She did not yet know that effort without protection only makes betrayal easier. She did not know that trust without documentation is dangerous. These were lessons she would learn much later, standing in the rain outside a locked shop door. But for now, on her wedding day, she was happy and hopeful about the future. Kola was charming when he wanted to be. He spoke softly to Ebony and laughed easily at small things. He praised her in public, telling people how lucky he was to have such a hard-working wife. He corrected her mistakes in private, always quietly so no one else would hear. "You're so lucky," other women told Ebony at the market. "Your husband respects you. He doesn't shout at you in public like other men." At first, everything seemed true and good. They opened the shop together with money they had both saved. Ebony woke before dawn every day to buy fish and spices from the wholesale market. Kola handled the suppliers and the paperwork. He told her it was easier that way because he had more education than she did. "You trust me, right?" he asked her once, holding a document for her to sign. "Of course I trust you," she replied, signing without reading. When the business grew and money increased, Kola's voice changed slowly. He spoke more and listened less. He traveled to other towns often for what he called business meetings. When Ebony asked questions about where the money was going, he smiled and said, "Business is too heavy and complicated for women to understand. Don't worry your head about it." Ebony swallowed the words that rose in her throat. She wanted to say that she understood business very well. At night, while Kola slept deeply beside her, Ebony lay awake counting profits in her head. She had a good memory for numbers. She noticed things that did not match. She noticed money that should be there but was not. She noticed new clothes in Kola's wardrobe that she had not bought for him. She noticed new phones that he said were gifts from business partners. But she said nothing out loud. She had learned from childhood that speaking too soon could bring trouble. So she watched and remembered instead. In folk tales that her grandmother used to tell, silence was always described as wisdom. The wise tortoise in the stories always waited and watched before acting. But the folktales forgot to say that silence can also be a trap that catches the silent person. Ebony was learning this truth slowly. One evening as she served Kola his dinner, she asked casually, "How much profit did we make this month?" Kola looked up from his food, surprised by the question. "Why do you ask? Do you need money for something?" "No, I'm just curious about our business," Ebony replied. "Don't worry about it," Kola said, returning to his food. "We're doing fine. That's all you need to know." That night, Ebony decided that silence was no longer wisdom. It was time to start documenting everything she saw. The old woman who sold vegetables at the stall next to their shop gave Ebony the first clear warning. Her name was Mama Ngozi, and she had been trading in that market for 30 years. She had seen many things. One afternoon, while they were both arranging their goods, Mama Ngozi said quietly, "Child, when a man stops explaining things to you, you should start writing things down for yourself." Ebony laughed politely, thinking the old woman was just making conversation. "Writing what down, Mama?" "Everything," Mama Ngozi replied, tying her headscarf more tightly. "Dates. Money coming in. Money going out. His trips. His visitors. Everything. Paper remembers what our minds forget." That night, after Kola had gone to sleep, Ebony found an old exercise book that her young cousin had left at the house. She opened it to the first page and began to write. She wrote dates of sales. She wrote down what they bought and what they sold. She wrote down Kola's trips to other towns and when he returned. She wrote small notes about unusual things she noticed. No anger in her writing. No accusations. Just facts and figures and dates. When Kola found the exercise book 3 weeks later while looking for something in their room, he laughed out loud. "You want to be an accountant now?" he teased her, flipping through the pages. "Why are you wasting time writing all this?" Ebony smiled calmly. "I'm just practicing my writing skills. The children in our street asked me to help them with homework sometimes." Kola did not see any danger in Ebony's exercise book. He saw only a wife playing with numbers to pass the time. He thought she was too simple to understand real business matters. He thought her education was too limited to cause him any problems. That was his first big mistake. He had forgotten that Ebony had grown up in the market. He had forgotten that she could count money faster than most educated people. He had forgotten that she had learned to survive by watching and learning, not by asking permission. He put the exercise book back where he found it and forgot about it. Meanwhile, Ebony continued writing every day. Her records grew more detailed. She began to see patterns in the missing money. She began to understand where Kola was spending the profits that should have been saved or reinvested in the shop. She said nothing. She just wrote and watched and waited. Her grandmother's folktales had taught her that timing was everything. The tortoise in the stories never acted hastily. He always waited for the right moment to reveal his wisdom. Ebony was waiting for her moment. She did not know exactly when it would come, but she knew she had to be ready when it arrived. So she prepared quietly, like a farmer preparing the ground before planting season. Ebony did not go searching for the truth about Kola's other life. The truth walked into their shop one afternoon wearing red lipstick and a tight dress. Her name was Lami, and she carried herself like someone who owned the world. Lami came to the shop often after that first day. She sat near the counter where Kola worked, laughing too loudly at things that were not funny. She called Kola "my king," and touched his arm when she talked to him. She looked at Abani as if she was invisible, as if she was just part of the furniture in the shop. Kola did not send Lami away. Instead, he seemed to enjoy her attention. He laughed at her jokes and brought her drinks. When Abani tried to serve customers near where they sat, Kola told her to go work at the other end of the shop. One afternoon, when Kola went out to meet a supplier, Lami leaned across the counter toward Abani. She smiled, but it was not a kind smile. "You're lucky he keeps you," Lami said softly so the customers would not hear. "Many men would have sent you away by now. You should be grateful." Abani felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. It was not anger exactly. It was something clearer and stronger than anger. It was understanding. That night, Kola did not come home at all. The next morning, Abani did not cry about Kola's absence. She did not call his phone repeatedly or ask his friends where he was. Instead, she woke up early as usual. She cooked breakfast. She cleaned the house. She went to the shop and opened it for business. But inside her heart, something fundamental had shifted. Love, which had once made her blind to problems, turned into clear observation. Trust, which had made her sign papers without reading, turned into careful record-keeping. Hope, which had made her believe that things would get better on their own, turned into determination to take action. She stopped asking Kola questions about the business or about where he went. Questions, she realized, were useless when someone had decided not to answer honestly. Instead, she started collecting her own answers. She watched. She listened. She wrote everything down in her exercise book. When customers paid money, she noted it down. When Kola took money from the shop drawer, she noted that too. When suppliers delivered goods, she kept the receipts carefully. She began to build a complete picture of the business, piece by piece, day by day. Mama Ngozi, the old woman from the next stall, watched Abani work with approval. One day she said quietly, "Good. You are learning." A woman who documents her life cannot be easily erased from it. 3 months after the day Lami first appeared, Abani took a bold step. She visited the local government office where business documents were kept. She went alone, telling Kola she was going to visit her aunt. The office was crowded and hot. Abani waited in line for 2 hours. When her turn finally came, she approached the clerk nervously. She had practiced what she would say. "Good afternoon, sir," she began politely. "I need some information, please." The clerk looked up from his papers, bored. "What information? Can a wife see company documents if her husband registered the business?" Abani asked. The clerk shrugged. "If her name is on the documents, yes. Otherwise, no." "What if she signed something years ago but doesn't have a copy?" Abani continued. "Then copies exist here in our office. You can request them if you pay the fee." Abani felt her heart beat faster. "How much is the fee?" The clerk told her the amount. It was money Abani had been saving secretly from her small sales of vegetables on the side. She paid immediately. Paper, Abani was learning, never forgets. Even when people lie or change their stories, documents remain the same. They are witnesses that cannot be intimidated or bribed or confused. 1 week later, Abani returned to collect her copies. Abani took the documents home and read them slowly when Kola was not there. Some of the words were difficult, so she asked Mama Ngozi's daughter, who had finished secondary school, to explain them to her. She learned new words that day: ownership, shares, partnership, consent, signatory. And she learned something that made her hands shake as she held the papers. Her name was there. Not everywhere, but in important places. On the original registration document. On the first bank account. On the shop rental agreement. She had signed these papers years ago without reading them, trusting Kola completely. But now these signatures meant something different. They meant she was not just Kola's wife. She was a co-owner of the business. She had rights. That night, Abani could barely sleep. She kept thinking about what the documents meant. She kept thinking about what she could do with this knowledge. But she also knew she had to be very careful. Kola was not a man who would give up power easily. She needed advice from someone who understood the law. She needed a lawyer, but lawyers were expensive. How could she afford one? Then she remembered something Mama Ngozi had once mentioned. There was a woman lawyer who sometimes helped market women for free or for very little money. The lawyer's office was in a small building near the main market. Abani found it after asking for directions several times. She climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor, her heart pounding with nervousness. The lawyer was a small woman with tired eyes and gray hair at her temples. Her name was Mrs. Adeyemi. She looked at Ebony standing in her doorway and gestured to a chair. "Sit down," she said. "Speak slowly and tell me everything." Ebony did. She told Mrs. Adeyemi about the shop, about Kola, about Lami, about being locked out. She showed her the exercise book with all her records. She showed her the documents from the government office. Mrs. Adeyemi read everything carefully. Then she looked up at Ebony and said something that Ebony would never forget. "You are not powerless," the lawyer said firmly. "You were just uninformed. But now you are informed, and that changes everything." She explained Ebony's rights under the law. She explained the options Ebony had. She explained how long things might take and what obstacles might appear. She also gave Ebony important advice about how to proceed. "Do nothing loudly," Mrs. Adeyemi advised. "Do everything correctly and quietly. Document everything. Don't threaten. Don't argue. Just prepare your case properly. When the time comes to act, you will be ready." Ebony understood. She thanked Mrs. Adeyemi, who charged her very little money for the consultation. For the next 6 months, Ebony acted completely normal at home and in the shop. She cooked Kola's favorite meals. She smiled when he came home late. She apologized when he criticized her, even when she had done nothing wrong. She allowed Kola to believe that he had won, that she had accepted her reduced position in his life. Inside, however, she was preparing for battle. It was a quiet battle, fought with papers and signatures and legal knowledge, but it was a battle nonetheless. She signed nothing new that Kola brought to her. When he asked her to sign documents, she always had an excuse. "My hand hurts today. I need my reading glasses. Can we do this tomorrow?" She delayed and avoided without seeming to refuse. Meanwhile, she copied everything she could find. Every receipt. Every bank statement that came to the house. Every letter from suppliers. She kept these copies hidden in a bag at Mama Ngozi's stall. She also continued to learn. Mrs. Adeyemi lent her simple books about business law. Ebony read them slowly, asking questions when she did not understand. She learned the law like it was a new language, and in many ways, it was. The old folk tales her grandmother told had always taught the value of patience. The tortoise waited. The spider planned carefully. The wise bird watched before flying. This was Ebony's season of patience. Then came the day when Kola locked Ebony out of the shop completely. It was the rainy day described at the beginning of this story. The day when everything came to a head. Kola had finally decided that Ebony was no longer necessary to the business. Lami would help him run the shop now. Ebony could stay home and be just a wife, nothing more. But Kola had made a critical error. He had forgotten about the papers Ebony had signed years ago. He had assumed those papers no longer mattered, or perhaps he had never really understood what they meant. He had been so focused on pushing Ebony aside that he had not thought about the legal implications of his actions. When Ebony stood in the rain that day, soaked and humiliated, some people watching probably thought her story was ending. They probably thought she would go home and cry and accept her fate. They did not know about the exercise book. They did not know about the copied documents. They did not know about Mrs. Adeyemi. They did not know that Ebony had been preparing for exactly this moment for 6 months. Ebony returned home that day, changed out of her wet clothes, and opened her exercise book. She added a new line in her careful handwriting. "Today, Kola locked me out of the shop in front of witnesses." Then she smiled. Not a happy smile, but a knowing one. The next morning, Ebony went to Mrs. Adeyemi's office with all her documents. "He has locked me out," she said. "I think it is time to act." Mrs. Adeyemi agreed. She had been waiting for Ebony to give the signal. Now they would move forward with the legal process. The lawyer prepared a letter explaining that Ebony was a co-owner of the business and had legal rights that were being violated. The letter demanded that she be given full access to all business premises and all financial records. It warned that legal action would follow if these demands were not met. The letter was delivered to Kola at the shop by a legal messenger. Kola read it and laughed. He showed it to Lami and they both laughed together. He thought it was an empty threat. He thought Ebony had wasted her money on a lawyer who could not really do anything. "My wife is trying to scare me," he told his friends at the bar that evening. "She hired some cheap lawyer to write a letter. It means nothing." But the letter meant everything. It started an official record of the dispute. It showed that Ebony had tried to resolve the matter peacefully before taking further action. It was the first move in a careful legal strategy. When Kola did not respond to the letter or change his behavior, Mrs. Adeyemi filed official documents with the court. Several weeks later, government officials came to inspect the shop. It was a routine inspection that happened to all businesses in that area, but the timing was significant. Mrs. Adeyemi had quietly informed the officials about the ownership dispute, so they came prepared with specific questions. The officials asked to see the business registration documents. They asked about the ownership structure. They asked about the bank accounts. They needed signatures from all registered owners to approve certain licenses. They called for Abeni's signature. Kola, who was in the shop with Lami, froze completely. His face went pale. He had not expected this. He had assumed the officials would only deal with him. "She's just my wife," Kola said, trying to sound casual. "I can sign for both of us." The head official looked at him seriously. "According to our records, she is not just your wife. She is also a registered signatory on this business. We need her signature, not yours alone." Silence fell in the shop. The customers who were there stopped and watched. Mama Ngozi, from her stall next door, heard everything and smiled to herself. Abeni, who had been waiting outside the shop, stepped forward calmly. She walked past Lami without looking at her. She walked up to the counter where the officials waited. She picked up the pen they offered. She signed the documents carefully, her hand steady. After she signed, Abeni did not leave immediately. The head official asked if there were any problems with the business that they should know about. It was a standard question, but it opened a door. Abeni spoke. Her voice was calm and clear. The customers and the officials listened. "This shop was built with my labor and my money," she said, looking directly at Kola. "My name is on the registration papers. I am a co-owner, not an employee. I am not furniture that can be moved aside when it is no longer wanted. I have rights under the law, and I am claiming those rights." Kola started to shout. "You are embarrassing me in public. You are my wife. You should." "I am your wife," Abeni interrupted, still calm. "But I am also a business owner. These are not opposite things. You locked me out of my own shop. That was illegal. The lawyer has explained this to you in writing." The official nodded. "If there is a legal dispute about ownership, this matter should be resolved in court. Until then, both parties should have access to the business." Kola's face turned red with anger. He wanted to argue more, but he could see that everyone was watching him. He could see that the officials were taking Abeni seriously. The old folktales always said that the quiet voice carries the sharpest knife. That day, Abeni's quiet voice cut through years of Kola's deceptions. After that day, everything began to change. The officials' visit had made the dispute public. Everyone in the market now knew that Abeni was a legal co-owner of the shop. Everyone knew that Kola had tried to push her out illegally. People who had once praised Kola for being a good husband now whispered that he was a deceiver. Suppliers who had done business with him became nervous, wondering if their contracts were secure. Customers asked questions about the ownership situation before making large purchases. Lami, who had seemed so confident before, began to realize that attaching herself to Kola might not be as beneficial as she had thought. Power was shifting away from him and she could feel it. She came to the shop less often. When she did come, she no longer sat close to Kola or called him, "my king." Within 2 months of the official's visit, Lami disappeared from the shop completely. She had moved on to find another man with more secure prospects. Kola, who had seemed so proud when Lami was beside him, now looked diminished and alone. The legal case moved slowly as legal cases do. But Mrs. Adeyemi was thorough and patient. She built the case carefully, document by document, proof by proof. Abeni continued to document everything that happened, just as she had learned to do. 6 months after the official's visit, the court hearing took place. Both Kola and Abeni were required to attend. Mrs. Adeyemi presented Abeni's case clearly. She showed the original documents with Abeni's signature. She showed the records of Abeni's contributions to the business. She showed evidence that Kola had locked Abeni out and tried to exclude her from the business she had helped build. Kola's lawyer tried to argue that Abeni had been just a helper, not a real partner. But the documents told a different story. The law told a different story. The judge listened to everything. Then he made his ruling. Abeni was indeed a legal co-owner of the business. She had rights to access the shop, the accounts, and all business information. Kola could not exclude her. If he wanted to end the partnership, he would have to buy out her share at a fair price, or they would have to sell the business and split the proceeds. Kola sat in the courtroom, defeated. All his attempts to push Abeni aside had failed. The paper trail she had created, the documents she had collected, the careful record-keeping in her exercise book, all of it had protected her. That night, Kola moved out of their house. He went to stay with a friend. He was too ashamed and too angry to face Abeni. For a while, Abeni ran the shop alone. It was hard work, but she had always been a hard worker. She woke before dawn just as she had done before. She bought the fish and spices. She served the customers. She kept careful records of everything. Slowly, the shop began to recover from the chaos of the dispute. Customers who had stayed away during the conflict returned. Suppliers who had been nervous became confident again when they saw that Ebony was managing things well. Ebony made changes. She renamed the shop New Dawn Trading, symbolizing a fresh start. She hired 2 young women from the market to help with the work. She paid them fairly and taught them about business, just as she wished someone had taught her when she was younger. She painted the shop walls a bright yellow. She organized the goods more efficiently. She introduced new products that customers had been requesting. The business grew in ways it had never grown when Kola was in charge. People in the market began to respect Ebony in a new way. She was no longer just Kola's wife. She was Madame Ebony, the shop owner. She was proof that a woman could run a business successfully on her own. Mama Ngozi watched all this with satisfaction. "I knew you had it in you," she told Ebony one afternoon. One day, a small girl from the neighborhood came to the shop. She was about 10 years old, the same age Ebony had been when she started learning about business. The girl watched Ebony work for a while, then asked a question. "Auntie Ebony," the girl said shyly, "when you were fighting with your husband, were you not afraid?" Ebony stopped what she was doing and looked at the girl. She thought carefully about how to answer. She did not want to lie and say she had never been afraid. But she also wanted to teach the girl something important. "I was afraid many times," Ebony replied honestly. "I was afraid when I went to the government office alone. I was afraid when I met with the lawyer for the first time. I was afraid when I had to speak in court. Being brave does not mean you are never afraid." "Then what does it mean?" the girl asked. "It means you are afraid but you do the right thing anyway," Ebony explained. "It means you don't let fear drive the car. You keep driving yourself even when fear is sitting in the back seat screaming at you to stop." The girl thought about this and nodded slowly. She smiled at Ebony and said, "When I grow up, I want to be brave like you." After the girl left, Ebony felt something warm in her chest. She realized that her story was no longer just about her own survival. It had become a lesson for others. 8 months after he moved out, Kola came back to the shop. He came in the evening after most customers had left. He looked thinner and older than before. His confident swagger was gone. "Ebony," he said quietly, "can we talk?" Ebony looked at him carefully. She felt no anger anymore, but she felt no love either. She felt only a kind of sad understanding that some things, once broken, cannot be put back together exactly as they were. "Talk," she said simply. Kola apologized. He said he had been foolish and greedy. He said he had been blinded by Lami's attention and had forgotten the value of what he already had. He said he wanted to come back, not necessarily to the marriage, but at least to work together in the business again. Ebony listened to all of this without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you for apologizing," she finally said. "I accept your apology. But accepting an apology is not the same as forgetting what happened. It is not the same as going back to how things were before." "I understand," Kola said. "I just want a chance to make things right." Ebony considered this. She thought about forgiveness and wisdom in the future. She thought about what the folktales taught about second chances. Ebony did forgive Kola in her heart. She understood that holding on to anger would only hurt her, not him. But forgiveness did not mean giving back the power she had claimed. It did not mean pretending that the past had not happened. She agreed to let Kola work in the shop again, but as an employee, not as a partner with equal authority. She paid him a fair salary. She treated him with respect. But she kept control of the accounts, the decisions, and the future direction of the business. Kola accepted these terms. He had learned, finally, that Ebony was not the simple, trusting woman he had thought he could manipulate. He had learned that she was strong and capable in ways he had never appreciated. Over time, a new balance emerged between them. They were no longer husband and wife in the romantic sense. They became business colleagues who treated each other professionally. They never lived together again. The trust necessary for marriage had been broken too completely to repair. But they learned to work together peacefully. Kola handled some of the heavy lifting and the deliveries. Ebony managed the finances and the strategic decisions. They split the profits fairly according to their contributions. It was not the life either of them had imagined, but it was honest and sustainable. As the years passed, Ebony found a new purpose beyond just running her shop. She began to teach other women in the market about business rights and legal protection. She showed them how to keep proper records. She explained why it was important to read documents before signing them. She taught them that trust and love should not make them careless about protecting their own interests. Every Saturday morning, women gathered in Ebony's shop before it opened for business. They brought their documents and their questions. Ebony, with the help of Mrs. Adeyemi who sometimes visited, explained laws and rights in simple language that everyone could understand. Never sign away your voice, Ebony would tell them. This became her most important lesson. Your signature is your power. Never give it away without understanding exactly what you are agreeing to. The women listened and learned. Some of them avoided problems by following Ebony's advice. Others, who were already in difficult situations, learned how to fight back legally and properly. Ebony's exercise book, the one she had started so many years ago when Mama Ngozi first advised her to write things down, was now full. She closed it carefully and put it away. The war that had started that rainy day when Kola locked her out was finally over. She had won not through violence or revenge, but through preparation, documentation, and knowledge of her rights. Ebony's story spread throughout the market and beyond. Women told it to their daughters. Market traders told it to new vendors. Teachers told it in schools as an example of quiet courage and practical wisdom. The story got simplified and exaggerated as stories do when they are passed from person to person. In some versions, Ebony became a rich businesswoman with multiple shops. In other versions, Kola suffered some dramatic downfall. But the core truth remained the same: a woman who had been pushed aside had used patience, documentation, and legal knowledge to reclaim her rights. People learned different lessons from Ebony's story. Young women learned to be careful about signing documents. Men learned that underestimating their wives could be costly. Everyone learned that quiet strength could be more powerful than loud confrontation. The story became a modern folktale, the kind that teaches practical lessons about contemporary life rather than just traditional morals. It showed that the old wisdom of patience and observation could combine with new tools like legal documentation and women's rights to create change. When people asked Ebony how she had found the courage to fight back, she always gave the same answer: I didn't find courage all at once. I found it in small pieces, day by day, signature by signature, entry by entry in my exercise book. Years later, when Ebony was an established and respected businesswoman in the market, a young journalist came to interview her for a story about successful women entrepreneurs. The journalist asked her what she thought was the most important quality for success. Ebony thought carefully before answering. People think strength means shouting or fighting or being aggressive, she said. But that's not the strength that lasts or that builds things. Real strength is preparation. It's patience. It's knowing when to speak and when to document. It's understanding that the quietest war can be the most effective one. The journalist wrote down her words and asked another question. Do you regret anything about how things happened with your husband? I regret that I didn't learn earlier to protect myself, Ebony replied honestly. I regret that I trusted completely without verifying. I regret that I thought love meant not asking questions or keeping records. But I don't regret fighting for my rights. I don't regret the long, quiet war I fought with papers and patience. The journalist's article appeared in the newspaper the following week. It brought even more women to Ebony's Saturday morning sessions. Some came from far away, traveling for hours to learn from the woman who had reclaimed her business and her dignity through legal knowledge and careful documentation. Ebony welcomed them all. Teaching had become as important to her as trading. If this were an old folktale told by grandmothers around evening fires, this is where the storyteller would pause and look meaningfully at the listeners. This is where she would say, "And what did we learn from Ebony's story?" The children would call out different answers. Don't trust too much. Keep records. Read before you sign. And the grandmother would nod and say, yes, all of these. But the deepest lesson is this: those who prepare quietly cannot be erased loudly. This became the central moral of Ebony's story as it was passed down. It meant that people who documented their lives, who understood their rights, who built careful cases with evidence and patience, these people were protected in ways that loud complaints and dramatic confrontations could never protect them. It meant that power built on deception would always be vulnerable to truth properly documented. It meant that the person who seemed weak but who was actually preparing carefully would ultimately prevail over the person who seemed strong but whose strength was based on lies. In the years after Ebony's story became well known, lawyers reported that more women were coming to them for help before situations became desperate. More women were keeping business records. More women were reading documents before signing them. The story had created ripples of change across many lives. And so this folktale ends, not with revenge or with Ebony becoming rich and Kola becoming poor, but with something more valuable than either of those outcomes. It ends with wisdom gained and shared. It ends with a community of women who learn to protect themselves. It ends with a new understanding of what strength really means. Ebony continued to run her shop successfully for many more years. She never remarried, finding that she preferred independence to partnership. She raised several nieces and nephews, teaching them all to be careful with their signatures and generous with their knowledge. Kola continued to work in the shop until he was old enough to retire. He never regained the authority he once had, but he found a kind of peace in honest work with clear terms. He sometimes told younger men, "Don't make my mistake. Don't confuse your wife's kindness with weakness. Don't assume that silence means acceptance." Mama Ngozi, the old woman who had first advised Ebony to start writing things down, lived to see the full results of her advice. Before she died, she told Ebony, "You took a small seed of wisdom and grew it into a tree that now gives shade to many people. That is the best thing a person can do with knowledge." The exercise book that Ebony had filled with dates and figures and observations was never thrown away. It sat on a shelf in her shop, a reminder of the quiet war she had fought and won. Moral of the story: those who prepare quietly cannot be erased loudly. Document your life. Understand your rights. Read before you sign. Trust but verify. Kindness should not mean carelessness. Love should not mean ignorance. These are the lessons of Ebony's story, and they remain true across time and circumstances. Closing prayer. May wisdom guide our hands when we write our names. May courage guard our future when we stand up for our rights. May we remember that the quietest battles, fought with patience and documentation, can win the most lasting victories. May we learn from those who came before us and teach those who come after us. And may we never sign away our voices, our rights, or our dignity, no matter who asks us to do so. Amen.